What's up, everybody? This is Shaka.
And I'm Chef.
And welcome
to the Skinny. Today we're interviewing Michelle Briks. She is the Chief Executive Yogi and creator of Ohra Yoga. She's also a mom and a yoga instructor, obviously, and a goddess. We can't wait for you to hear what she has to say.
She's awesome, all right? So tune in. Here we go. Hello, Michelle. How you doing? Welcome to the Skinny. Thank you for sitting with us today.
Thank you guys for having me. Such an honor.
All right, so we're just gonna go through your kind of journey into fitness. So first off, how did you get into fitness?
So I think I found yoga was probably my entranceway into a regimented fitness. I did sports when I was in high school, right? But you know, I never really did anything formal. Exercise back in those days in my world wasn't a thing. So I found yoga pretty early on in my life when I was 18, a very different style than I practice now. And then I happened upon an amazing teacher who I'd love to mention. She was my inspiration. She started it all, Johanna Aldrich, who actually now lives an hour north of here, and Elyce knows, because that's where Elyce and I met, right? And I happened upon her, and I really fell in love with that style of yoga. And that was back in 2005. Yeah, it must have been. And then she announced that she was doing a teacher training that was starting in 5 weeks. So I signed up, and I really did not do that for, you know, the journey of becoming a yoga teacher. I did that for myself. I had a 6-year-old at the time, and I figured, well, that'll really give me some tools that I could use on my own to stay fit, to stay healthy. And, you know, fast forward 14 years later, and here I am. So, and it's been quite a journey that sort of took on a life of its own.
Now, had you ever been thinking that you wanted to do a teacher training? Did anything ever creep up into your mind?
So for yoga, no, I already was in school for dietetics. So I'm a registered dietitian. I know a little fun fact. And I was already in school for that when I signed up for my teacher training. I think I was almost done with my master's. No, I was already teaching in Queens College, actually. I was an adjunct lecturer at Queens College at the time. That's what I was doing. I was teaching nutrition and exercise science. So I kind of had an interest already through that, but it was not really as regimented until I dove into yoga.
Yeah, that was when we very first met. I remember you telling me you were teaching at Queens College, and we met when our daughters were taking yoga together.
That's right. And we had kids that were 1 year apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
who's now freshman and senior. We're all about to be sophomore and about to be freshman in college. Crazy. Anyway, sorry, Shaka.
Were you pulled one way or the other when yoga came in? Like, you were sitting there, you're doing dietetics on this side, and then yoga comes in.
Yeah. So when yoga came in, I was taken with it in a way that I had not been taken with anything else up until that point. You know, I dabbled in sports. I had played tennis. I had played volleyball. I was trying to do running, you know, everything. I had sort of tried it all, weight training. And I still do a little bit of everything, by the way. I believe in that, but we'll get to that later. Yeah. And then I was really just quite taken with yoga pretty much right away. And that became a regular practice for me 4 to 5 times a week. I'd still kind of hop on the treadmill, you know, once a week and try to get on the weights once a week. But yeah, yoga took on a life of its own for my own practice. So the funny story is I was not planning on doing yoga for yoga teaching at all. I was just doing it for myself to carve out space, being a mom, being in school. The day after I graduate from my 200-hour teacher training at Sonic Yoga in the city, I show up for class, to take class with one of my mentors. And there was some sort of emergency that she had, and she couldn't show up to teach the class. So I was in class, set up as a student. There was probably 25 other people in class. And somebody walks in and says, oh, you know, there was an emergency with the instructor. Are there any yoga teachers in the room? So of course, I don't know what I was thinking, but I raised my hand, like first day out of teacher training. All I had taught was like half of a practice, right? I raised my hand. I go, oh, I'm a yoga teacher.
Wow, that's ballsy.
so they're like, do you want to teach? And I was like, okay. So I got up in front of 25 people in the city, and I guess I taught a class and got through it. I gather I lived to tell the tale, right? So I must have gotten through the class. The second I stood up there, my heart sank into my feet, and I was like, what did you just do, Michelle? What did you do? But that, I love to tell that story because that story is like seriously representative of, that was the beginning of that sort of teaching journey. And it really took on a life of its own after that. I said, wow, I guess I felt almost, it was the scariest thing I ever did, but I felt super empowered from that experience and getting through that experience. And then one thing led to another. I moved up to Northern Westchester, and yeah, the rest is history.
Wow, that's an awesome story. I love it.
So now looking back, do you feel like, you know, that class was pretty bad, or do you think like the first class
it must have been awful. I just can't even imagine how bad it could have been. But, you know, people were kind, as yogis are, and, you know, everyone's like, thank you for teaching something. It was probably super, you know what, I shouldn't say bad. It was probably just super basic, as it is sometimes when you just come out of teacher training. I mean, because here we are 14 years later, and I've never stopped taking workshops, taking different continuing education programs, continuing to learn and grow. So even though my style, it's probably there's some, you know, inklings of how it was back in the beginning, but it's definitely evolved and grown since then. But here's the thing. I tell this to my teacher trainees all the time. You have to have a first class, and it has to start somewhere, right? The journey has to start. So where you begin isn't where you end up. It's just the beginning.
So you take her class. What do you like about her class?
Oh, I love everything about Michelle's class. Michelle is such a gifted instructor, and one of the reasons I think I love her class so much is the way that she puts her asanas together and the flow of it. Everything just builds in such a way that it seems so natural. It's like it's supposed to just go that way. And she builds, you know, from the very beginning of class, she keeps building and building and building, and you get to the end in a way that you're like, oh, I can do this. And like, it feels like open and natural. And yeah, she really has a gift for the way she structures her class.
So do you is there anything particular that you're mindful of when you're putting a class together? Like what goes through your mind when you're putting a class together?
So when I'm putting a class together, you know, it used to take me with that story back in the day when you're like, was that a good class? It probably took me like, you know, that was on the fly. But after that, it started to take me like 2 hours to put a class together in the beginning. Right now, it doesn't really quite take long. It takes about 10 minutes to put a class together. And there's a couple of things I always consider. One is, where are we in time and space, right? What season are we in? What is going on in the world that's palpable? You know, I don't address politics in my classes, but there's things going on all around us. So you have to be really aware of it when you come to the mat as a teacher to teach a class, right? That's one of the ways that you plug in, you stay present, you get connected to your students, even if you're pushing them a little bit beyond their limits, right? Or whatever kind of class it is, you have to plug in and stay present. So that's the first thing is, you know, what is going on around us in our environment. And then my classes are a combination of getting to know your own strength coupled with relaxing, finding ease and grace in the body, right? So there's a very fine, delicate balance between the two. And when I'm putting a class together, I'm very fond of peak sequencing, which means, like Elyce said, it's sort of, you start in the body, and there's also, you know, with yoga, not only the body, but the energetics that go along with it. So I'm sort of mixing the two, and that's the foundation, and building towards sort of a peak experience or a peak pose. So the body movements will sort of, you know, we call it krama in yoga, which means level up. They'll start with the most basic form of that movement, and then they'll sort of level up from there. And energetically, we sort of tether it into, you know, something that we're working on to balance our minds, our spirits. Yeah.
The other thing I love about your class so much is, and it's so good for me in particular, because I tend to be a very competitive person, not competitive with anybody else, but competitive with myself. So I tend to be competitive on the mat, which I'm working on not being that. And your class, I find it allows me to just be where I am that day. And I actually find myself giving in and taking a child's pose, where you might say, you know, like maybe now you just want to take a child's pose. I don't feel the need to always push myself so hard. Like, you make it very accessible to just find where you are in that moment, in that space, and be okay with it.
Is there any particular style that like you of yoga that you like can't stand and you don't understand like why people do that style? Oh yeah, now we're getting to it.
Well, that's a loaded question. Yeah, so I mean, look, everybody has. I'll preface my answer by saying this, right? Everybody has.
Loud. Go at it.
I have to. As a yogi, I have to preface it by saying this, right?
Okay.
So there's different personalities, right? They're gonna fit different types of yoga, like Elyce just said, and it takes one to know one, right? So I totally get where you're coming from, Elyce, 100%. So there's different styles of yoga out there because that suits different personalities, different types of people, right? So having said that, like, for example, I'm not a huge fan of like Bikram style yoga, and not because of the heat. I happen to love heat, but because of the anatomical way they cue some things, to me, from an anatomical perspective, is very dangerous. Like, I would, if my yogis, my teacher trainees would do that in a practicum, I'd be like, we got to talk about that, you know? So there's certain ways that the anatomical, you know, or that the anatomy is cued, like, for example, the locking the knees, which just makes me really worried about, you know, how that got passed down. Having said that, but there are people who love to take it because it's a regimented style of yoga. Every class you're going to expect the same thing, which for some people is really freeing for their minds. So in that regard, I love it, right? But I wouldn't necessarily practice it. And for me, yin yoga is very hard, and it, because like Elyce, you know, it started with the competitive spirit. The more my asana has grown, the more I've learned to surrender into the experience. I'm not really competing with myself as much anymore, but I totally get where that started. For yin, it's very hard for me personally to sit in those poses for such a long time. And I'm also not sure if it has any further benefit to like the fascia than opening up the fascia in an integrated vinyasa class. So I'm not super convinced about that.
Now, is that your mind just saying like, I don't like this, so I'm not going to let myself be convinced?
Very well could be. Yeah, very well.
I struggle with yin too, but the few times I've taken it, I find that it's probably a good yoga for me, because I struggle with it, because I am forced to sit in this pose and I'm so miserable and I want to stop, that I have to allow my brain to just be with this misery and like clear everything. And it's so uncomfortable in so many different ways, but sometimes I'm like, well, maybe that's what this is all about. Like, maybe that's what yoga is about. I'm supposed to have to sit with this and get through it, you know?
Totally.
But it's so not my favorite either.
That's a weird line to have to like play with, because when you're not really sure when you're supposed to sit there and when you're not supposed to sit there. Is that like the instructor's job? Is that your job? Like, how does that?
I guess it's a little bit of both, right? Like, you know, there's obviously a certain, you know, fascial opening that they're guiding you towards, and there's a theory in mind behind it. It's really hard to sit. I'm like, but I just want to, you know, move with it a little bit, and you're just like, oh, right. So, but I have students who love it and connect with it, and I think that that's the amazing thing, and that's why there's different styles of yoga, and not everybody is going to connect with every style. There's something for everyone, hopefully. You know.
What's your view on the yoga rock star, the big personalities in yoga? Are you pro?
Yeah.
Against?
I think if they're inspiring people in some way and they're coming from an authentic place, I'm super pro, right? If they are, you know, I think most yoga teachers could agree, and they'll nod their heads yes if they're listening to this or not listening to this, right? They'll nod their heads and say, like, you know, I became a yoga teacher because like I'm a little bit crazy in my own way, right? I need help a little bit more to find a balance. Yeah, that's why I went into it. I mean, anybody who doesn't admit that they're slightly, you know, they need this for their own lives too. That's why we go into this, right? Because, you know, otherwise, like my daughter said very early on, she goes, thank God you ended up doing yoga because you'd be like totally nuts. She said that to me when she was 8, right? Because I did it when she was 6. She said that to me when she was 8.
That's
so and she'll still, yeah, she's 19 now, and she'll say the same thing. It was the best thing that I ever did for her too, right? Was go into it. Because it forces you to stay really, really calm and be present when you have to show up for somebody else. But yeah, I think, you know, most yoga teachers will say that they're working on their own stuff, but there are certain celebrity yogis who are, you know, almost celebrity yogis because their Instagram pictures look really, really amazing, right? Which is sort of phasing out, and I'm happy about that, right? Because I mean, she has a beautiful body practice. Her Instagram poses are amazing, right? And I'm sure she's inspiring people, which again is the pro of the whole thing. But you know, the form, and because she's this super bendy person, and she's, you know, totally overarching her back and hiking her hip and doing things that I teach people to try not to do, though, that sort of inspiration of it to do these extreme circus style, Cirque du Soleil type moves, I think that gives a false impression of what yoga is, right? You don't have to be that bendy, flexible, or look like her to look beautiful and to feel a sense of satisfaction, accomplishment in your poses, right? There's, you know, most humans can't look like that, is the truth, right? There are just some things that our bodies won't let us do, and that's okay. So in that way, that sort of celebrity type rock star, you know, is a little bit misleading. However, they still might inspire the start of someone's journey. So I'll go half-half on that question.
At the end of the day, yoga really isn't about like the beauty of a pose to somebody else. It's about what
Correct.
you're getting out of the pose on your mat. So it's also kind of pushing it in a direction that it really isn't meant to go anyway, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's pushing it in a goal-oriented direction. And although, like me and you said, some people, they're always going to be somewhat goal-oriented, right? But it's the moment that you surrender into where your body is right here, right now. Not the future of what it could look like, not where it was yesterday, but right here, right now. The moment you surrender into that is when you get the most gains. And like you said before, that could mean, oh my God, I just stuck a handstand, or wow, I decided to push myself back into a child's pose and rest this one out. And the moment you surrender, right? And the second I got handstand and I got it was like the second I stopped pushing for it, right? It was just, all right, let me do the things that lead up to it, and maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't happen. But in the end, if I teach a really complicated pose in one of my classes, I know sometimes yes, sometimes no. If I teach one and some people approach the direction of getting there, wow, they found all this space, this beauty in their bodies. If they never get the pose, fine. One day, who knows, they might, right? But that's the point, is not just to get there. It's to find what's available to you on the journey towards it.
You know, we had somebody come in the other day, the yoga instructor. He had a yoga studio in the city, and kind of sad a little bit. He was a little beaten down, you know, because of the pandemic and everything. He had to close his shop, and he said that, you know, he's like, you know, I was already not really doing so well because, you know, I got into yoga, changed my life. And he's like, you know, I've been teaching and everything, and I got into the business of it. He's like, and now he's like, in the city, kind of shifted. It's less about, you know, the yoga, and it's more about like who has the hottest playlist. And I was like, whoa, is that what's really going on down there? Do you feel like, you know, that's what's happened? Maybe is it just a city? Is it in general? Is it
Yeah, it's interesting because I really do feel, you know, I'm here with you guys in Northern Westchester, and it is a totally different scene up here. Up here, you have, you know, our crew, our yoga crew, the people who come and take yoga are mainly, you know, working family people, right? A lot of people already have families, young families, or their kids are grown. Of course, you have some kids who are still living at home, or you have, you know, some younger people who simply just don't want to be in the city and they're up here to get away. But largely, we have a group of people whose time is very valuable to them, right? And they need to work efficiently and they need to work smart. So I think that they are way more about the quality of yoga up here, you know, meaning if my playlist doesn't work one time, all right, so be it, right? Look, I've been teaching on Zoom. This was my 17th week, 18th week, 17th week that I just finished teaching on Zoom, and, or about to finish. Tomorrow will be the end of the 17th week. And I recently troubleshot and figured out the best way to get music integrated in. So for weeks and weeks and weeks, I didn't have any music at all. And it didn't matter. So people kept showing up for the quality. Like I always thought it was a little bit about that, but I don't think so. Not up here. But I have been to the city scene is completely different. They want to get in, they want to get out, they want to be done.
What's like your workout and your diet philosophy, especially since you also have a degree in nutrition? How do you integrate the two?
So the integration of the two for me is through Ayurveda. Ayurveda is the sister science to yoga. And after my initial 200-hour teacher training, I took a pause from yoga training and I did my, I already had the dietetics degree, and I did a full 1.5 year study in Ayurveda. So that included nutrition, that included yoga. And then after that, I went back for my advanced yoga training, and then I kept going with the yoga. But yeah, Ayurveda for me allows me to integrate the nutrition and the yoga in a very holistic way. It sort of, you know, Ayurveda it's called the science of life, basically. And it focuses on people as individuals rather than the one dietary recommendation or yoga recommendation that's good for all. It's very specific towards what's your constitution. So it helps you live your life in balance, not somebody else's life in balance, your life in balance, and gives you the tools that you need, both from an exercise perspective and from a nutrition standpoint, about what fits better for you. So that has really sort of informed and made holistic that what kind of Western nutrition degree for me, and I love it. So I incorporate those two things in, and that kind of brings it and melds it all together.
Are you ever like, you know what, Ayurveda tomorrow, I'm gonna eat everything that I feel like eating? You know, do you ever have those craving days where it's like, I want that, I'm having it?
So I do have those craving days for sure, but since I've let myself surrender into the things that Ayurveda says that are right and wrong for me, I'm so much more comfortable digestively that I just really just want to listen to it. So I very seldom just let it go and eat whatever I want. I'm mostly vegan, but part-time vegetarian. So sometimes I eat eggs and fish because I start listening to my body. If my body's feeling it, then I need it. So I have already those restrictions. I mean, I grew up Jewish Orthodox, so we kept kosher growing up. So I know, fun fact. So I never had pork or shellfish or anything like that. So it was easy enough for me to give it up because I never had it. And I prefer to be gluten-free because I feel it sort of swell in my joints when I have gluten. So I prefer to be gluten-free. So having said that, I totally have cravings, but I'll fulfill my craving with like coconut ices or something like that, or like a gluten-free donut rather than a Dunkin' Donuts donut or something. So yeah.
What about alcohol? What about that glass of wine? Do you like the wine?
I know I would love the wine. I love the wine. I'd be lying if I didn't tell you I love the wine. But same thing lately, I just want to be able to get up and exercise in the morning and move really well. So I find that wine with my constitution, it makes sense with my Ayurvedic constitution, wine also, it bloats up my joints. So I save it for super special occasions. Like, lately the super special occasions have been a little bit more frequent because my friends from the city, we have the backyard, so they come and chill here. So someone's always bringing a big bottle of wine because they want to get out of the city and just like hang out in the backyard for a little bit. So it sort of works with the fire pit. Yeah, so lately it's been a little bit more frequent, but normally it's every now and again I'll have the wine, but not because I don't like it. Just making that clear.
Awesome. Yeah. What about how have you managed through this whole pandemic and COVID thing? Speaking of your friends from the city coming up, like how has it affected you personally and your business?
Yeah, it's this thing is just wild all around. For me personally, there've been a ton of struggles that I've gone through. Like a lot of people, right? Everyone's struggling in their own way through this process. But in a lot of ways, it highlighted for me patterns that I tend to fall into, that I've fallen into before, just different story, right? Same pattern, different story of that pattern reoccurring. So it's given me a little bit more of the time and space to notice those patterns and to really do some good work on the self. So that's been sort of hard, but at the same time, a beautiful, place of growth for me. And the other thing that's been amazing, there's definitely struggles. I'm just trying to highlight the amazing because it gave me a lot more time to do the things. And, I have planted seeds pre-COVID, but it gave me the time to water the seeds that I had planted and flourish them into something. So there was a meditation course that I had been wanting to take for the better part of 9 months, and then finally purchased the course and took it. So having done that, it was a style of meditation that I really connected to when I found it last summer, about a year ago. Emily Fletcher's Ziva meditation. It's amazing. I teach it after my Friday morning dynamic flow class, 9:15. Shameless plug.
You like that content, huh? Well, guess what?
Go over to our website, www.myskinnybuddha.com, and you can see the full video. Plus, there's lots more food, fitness, and interviews for you to check out over there.
Hurry up. Get over there.